are required in Washington and 7 counties in Oregon, a lot of people think they found a clever little way to get around it.
New card. What do you think?
But I got some news for you. You still gotta wear a mask. And while masks are the #1 thing you're emailing us about, how our homeless population is handling the pandemic is easily #2. And today, we're getting into that. And a sober trip back through the KGW vault.
I really couldn't even stand to watch it.
For a reminder of America's long and complicated history of riots.
This is not right. Let's get out here and do something.
Here's the story.
Our editor here on The Story, Zach Carver, puts those together every night. Boy's got skills, right? How good are those? Give me energy to start each and every edition of The Story, which this is currently. Hi, I'm Dan Haggerty. This is the show that wants to hear from you. So get out your phone. Go find it. Who are we kidding? You're holding your phone right now. We all are. They're part of us. Have you guys read 1984? Regardless, look me up on Facebook, Dan Haggerty KGW. Let me know what's on your mind. You can email us, thestory@kgw.com. I'm on Instagram, dan.haggerty, or thestorykgw. But the best way, the fastest way to get a hold of us, hop on Twitter, use that hashtag #HeyDan. Keep those questions coming, the critiques, everything. And together, who knows, we might actually be able to pull this thing off. Let's get started. All right, let's get to the big story. And it is a big story. That's why I think we've been getting so many emails about it. Many of them sounding like this one we got from Gay Kane. I have never heard any news regarding our local homeless people. I am surprised that they are being blatantly omitted. Could you please do some research on them and let us all know how they are faring and whether the virus has gotten to them? Thank you so much to everybody using that hashtag #HeyDan. Now, look, COVID-19 and homelessness are big enough issues separately from each other. So obviously the intersection of the two, even more so. But we're going to try and tackle it for you tonight. And other questions, right? We've been getting a ton, as I mentioned, like, has there been an outbreak in the homeless community? Are there still resources available to people? And we agree, getting some of the answers to those questions is long overdue. Here's Maggie Vespa.
Portland's housing crisis has always been visible. In a city still largely shut down by the COVID-19 pandemic, it seems to stand out more than ever. And people homeless in Portland are afraid, just like the rest of us. We met Stephen Hawes Thursday. He's been living in a shelter.
It would be devastating. It would be absolutely the worst thing on the planet. If the homeless people got it, everybody would get it. It would be very bad.
As far as how Portland's homeless are doing amid the pandemic, there's a lot to unpack. But we'll start with this. Point blank, there has not been a documented outbreak of COVID-19 among Portland's homeless. That, according to Mark Jolin, director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services. It runs shelters and housing services for both the city of Portland and Multnomah County.
We know that we only have had about 16, I think, as of yesterday, positive cases in the homeless community in Multnomah County.
16 positive cases of the roughly 4,000 people ID'd as homeless in Multnomah County last year. That said, not to be rude, but how would officials know infection rates? Are houseless people even getting tested?
People experiencing homelessness have actually had better access to testing from the beginning because we understood the risk that someone becoming infected with COVID-19 who was in one of our shelters could present, for creating an outbreak. We created 2 essentially motel sites that are set aside for individuals who are showing any kinds of symptoms.
Those motels are the Jupiter Hotel along Southeast Burnside and a second one, but county officials aren't making that second location public because it hosts victims of domestic violence. Since the pandemic began, close to 270 people have been taken out of local homeless shelters and placed into these motel rooms to be treated and tested. And speaking of shelters, the city and county have opened new temporary ones in the Oregon Convention Center and local community centers. That's allowed them to shelter the same number of people, but spread them out, letting everyone maintain social distance. In other words, officials are confident in the work they're doing to keep COVID-19 out of Portland's shelters. Obviously, the situation on Portland's streets is a different story. Of the 4,000 people ID'd as homeless in Multnomah County last year, almost exactly half are what's called unsheltered, meaning they live and sleep outside. Helping them stay safe amid a pandemic is hard. Nonprofits are doing a lot of that work, namely transition projects. Throughout the pandemic, staff have continued showing up to keep things running. Stacey Bork took a break to describe the work their outreach teams are doing on the streets.
Education is number one, but also equipping folks with the gear and the supplies that they need.
That includes handing out masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, and making sure people on our streets know about social distancing. If anyone is experiencing symptoms, staff can help connect them to healthcare services. One thing that's helped, these socially distant outdoor camping spaces opened by the city and county on both sides of the river. It's let dozens living outside sleep more safely in a more controlled environment. But yeah, obviously, people sleeping outside are more vulnerable, so staff are working tirelessly.
We know that people experiencing homelessness, that population of people is getting older and they're getting sicker. We're still showing up because we have a mission and we have people that we are committed to doing our best on their behalf and alongside them, and that has been a crack of light in a rather dark time.
And if nothing else, the closure of businesses, coffee shops, libraries, and some services offering basics like food put huge stressors on Portland's homeless. Also, recent protests downtown have made sleep difficult and scared some people. Stephen Hawes says these last few months are wearing on him, just like anyone else.
Tension, pretty much, a lot of stress, a lot of anger, just not being able to get close to each other is really hard.
All right, Maggie Vespa joining us now, and as you mentioned, we've been getting a lot of viewer questions. I want to read one to you right now and see what you think. Roger wrote in and asked, has there been a study to estimate how many more people will be homeless with this pandemic? What do we know about that?
Okay, so basically the answer is locally, no, there has not. But Mark Jolan, who you heard from in that piece, says that nationally, some experts are estimating that there could be a 40 to 45% jump in the homeless population nationwide. So again, that's a national estimate, and obviously that would be massive. It's a projection, so that could change, but it's definitely something that government agencies and nonprofits are sort of bracing for. And then for what it's worth, also our local agencies basically say that they don't feel like they've seen the spike in need from people who lost their jobs because of the pandemic or have been impacted financially because of it, but they feel like that's coming. So we haven't even seen that sort of tidal wave yet.
Got it. We've had some other people writing in noticing something that we've noticed since we work downtown, or at least I come into work. You've been working from home. But people who drive around here are seeing more homeless people in the downtown area, seeing more camps set up, seeing more tents set up on sidewalks. Are they seeing things, or is that true? Is that what's happening?
No, they're not seeing things. We ask people who we talked to in our piece, and these officials, basically their take on that. And before I give you their answer to that question, I want to show you and kind of pull back the curtain a little bit. All of the video that you saw in our story today, by the way, was shot yesterday. So it's super current. So if you haven't been in downtown Portland, this is basically what it looks like. That said, we were told, this is the answer, no one has counted to see if there are more people who are homeless downtown. But officials say what is very likely, very plausible, is that people who are camping in other parts of Portland pre-pandemic have moved into downtown because that's where the most services were basically still up and running, like food banks and whatnot. Smaller nonprofits, unfortunately, on the city's outskirts were just more likely to close during the pandemic. So they said it's very plausible that people just kind of went where they knew they could get help. The city, it's also worth noting, and this is the second point, the city is sort of pulling back on clearing or sweeping. They don't like that term, but people call it that, sweeping homeless camps. They've kind of raised the bar for which ones they will sweep. There has to be like a clear and present danger for them to move them. So it's also worth noting the camps that you see are in the same place for longer, and that might make them more noticeable. So it's definitely, things are changing, have changed in Portland, in the downtown core, but we just don't know if there are more people. And then I just want to point out, it's obvious that there's so much to unpack, and we said that at the top of this story. So if people are curious about something and they want to reach out and let us know the topic that they want to hear more about, we're going to be diving more deeply into these sort of side stories and parts of this story over the next several days. So let us know what you want to hear.
Absolutely. Keep the questions coming. Maggie, thank you.
Sure.
So now that Clatsop County opted in to requiring face masks starting July 1st, I'm pretty sure our daily flow of mask-related questions isn't going to slow down anytime soon, especially on top of the fact that today was the very first day that they were required across the entire state of Washington. Not to mention after a man from Sweet Home was arrested after he showed up to a court hearing without a mask, and instead of putting one on, decided, hey, I'm just going to leave instead. He said on the Lars Larson show that he had respiratory problems. That's why he wouldn't put on the mask. And the court said they would have accommodated if he'd only let them know. And while legitimate health concerns, of course, are accepted as reasons to not wear a mask, Kristen Severance found out that there's a lot of people who are just flat out faking it.
You may have seen this card on social media saying, "I'm exempt from all regulation mandating face mask usage in public," or this one, claiming under the Americans with Disabilities Act, I'm not required to disclose my medical conditions, or this one, claiming those same things, threatening a $75,000 fine to businesses. According to the United States Department of Justice, all these cards are bogus. Don't print one out, don't laminate one, and don't try to use the reasonings on the card for not wearing a mask in a business. Tom Stenson is the Deputy Legal Director at Disability Rights Oregon.
Have you seen these ADA exemption cards, and are they legitimate?
I have seen them. They're not. The DOJ, the United States Department of Justice, put out a statement saying those are not real. And I'd say further that anybody who says that the Americans with Disabilities Act means that anybody who has a disability can go anywhere they want to without a mask, period, end of sentence. That's just a misstatement of what the law is.
Stenson says there are definitely people with disabilities who can't wear masks. And yes, businesses must make reasonable accommodations for them, like offering delivery or curbside pickup.
Usually the reasonable accommodation is not likely to be having you go into an establishment and walk around without a mask on, if the policy of that store is that everybody wears a mask.
He said the Freedom to Breathe agency, the Facebook group behind the cards, or the people trying to use the ADA as a way out of wearing masks hurts people with actual disabilities.
It's hurting them literally. I mean, people with disabilities are some of the most vulnerable people in our community to the spread of COVID. And so having people who don't have disabilities cynically using the ADA to prove some personal political point, grounded in conspiracy theories, which is ultimately going to mean COVID spreads further, more people with disabilities will get COVID, and more people with disabilities will die. I mean, that's the most, horrible and cynical use of the Americans with Disabilities Act that I can think of.
Well, that's a soundbite, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I am glad that we heard from him on the topic of the fact that there are people who legitimately can't wear a mask.
Right. And his clients, people with actual disabilities, he said they're not cutting out cards and running around all over the place saying, look, I don't have to wear a mask. I mean, they're not doing that. This is an actual problem for them. He tells his clients, call the store before you go, explain your situation, see if they have delivery, see if they have curbside pickup. I mean, he said it best. He said, people who use this ADA as a way to not wear a mask or to try to not wear a mask, it just hurts everyone.
Good point. Kristen, thank you so much.
You bet.
Hey, let's stay on the topic of masks for a minute. Lincoln County Sheriff, we talked to him. He says, look, they had good intentions, but missed the mark when they exempted people of color from being required to wear masks to avoid potential discrimination. After worldwide attention, on Wednesday, they reversed that policy. And between this interview you're about to see and the statement that they put out yesterday, it sounds like they changed it for two reasons. One, black members of the community actually complained about it. And two, racists complained about it. A lot of racists.
It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And things I can't repeat here if you're going to put them on TV. But they were very threatening. And to individuals who really weren't even involved in the decision, too. I think that was one of the things that I thought was was really amazing how people were just finding any number they could to call. They called several numbers at our sheriff's office and were reaching people that had no idea that was what was even going on, and were leaving, horrible voicemails and just really threatening, demeaning, harassing behavior. And again, it was, I also want to point out, it really wasn't because of that reaction that we made the change too. It was really because of, talking with leaders from with communities of color saying, you got to remove that. We're being more harassed than we were before because of this. And so it really wasn't because we were hit hard with those comments. It was really because it was having a negative effect. The county was trying to make an effort to do something right, to address the concerns, and it absolutely missed the mark and had very negative effects. And hopefully the statement that is put out has corrected that. And again, the whole message was, we need to wear a face covering to protect ourselves from the virus, and that's really where I'm looking at, is it really took away from the entire message we were trying to get out.
Yeah, the virus doesn't discriminate. It's just the facts of it. But it is clear by the data that Black Americans have been disproportionately affected by it for a number of reasons. So it's extra infuriating that one of the best tools to protect them from this virus also risks putting them in danger of discrimination or worse. And I got some news for you. Luckily, this is a news show, but this virus is still in full swing. We might not even be to the worst of it yet. Today, Oregon hit a new one-day record of cases, 250, 61 in Multnomah County. We also hit a sad marker today, surpassing 200 deaths. And we still aren't sure what the impact these protests that we've seen will have on the numbers. So the best thing we can do right now is what we've been telling you to do all along. And I'll continue to say it until I'm blue in my mask-covered face. Wear a mask, wash your hands, keep your distance, and stay home if you feel sick.
It may be a tiny fraction of protesters causing all the damage downtown, but it adds up to a lot of moolah. So why not arrest the lawbreakers?
Getting arrested is a traumatic thing.
Easier said than done. And a snapshot of America's complicated history of riots from the KGW vault.
It's a very, very ugly situation here.
When the story.
Welcome back to The Story. Thank you for joining us, and for everybody joining the conversation online using the hashtag HeyDan or emailing us at thestory@kgw.com. Dan McLean actually just emailed us and wanted to know, where is Laurel Porter? A lot of people have been asking that question. She's just on vacation. She's enjoying some R&R. She's going to be back on Monday. But check in with her on social media. Say hi. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. A lot of other people were weighing in on maybe the most pressing story of the day.
A big change is on the way for college sports fans in Oregon. Matchups between Oregon and Oregon State will no longer be called the Civil War.
The term Civil War has been associated with this rivalry for nearly 90 years. The two schools worked together to drop that name. Oregon State President Ed Ray said changing this name is overdue. It represents a connection to a war fought to perpetuate slavery.
Okay, so yes, the former Civil War has gone the way of Lady Antebellum, the Dixie Chicks, and more Confederate statues than we can even count. Both the U of O and OSU mutually agreed on this, to stop using the term to describe their rivalry matches because of the symbolism associated with the actual American Civil War. But before you think this means there's some truce between the two schools, I need to direct you to the attention of President of U of O, who provided us with tonight's quote of the day. Michael Schill says, quote, "It will absolutely continue to be one of the great rivalries in college sports." I like that. You know, as soon as they, I guess, decide what to call it, which brings us to all of you watching us here tonight. Earlier today, we asked for you to rename the rivalry game. We got a combination of inspired and uninspired answers, if I'm being honest. V.W. Linden suggested maybe the most popular one, the Platypus Bowl. It's genius, right? I think that might actually have a real shot. Cat Whisperer suggested the Water Bowl, little double entendre, like that too. Michelle Ellis went for the simple the State Games. Elle Ann had a few options here. The Wetlands Bowl, or Willamette River Bowl, or Poor Beavers Never Win Bowl. Ouch. I mean, true, but ouch nonetheless. I know we have some clever viewers. Let's keep that going. I know somebody out there has a winner, so let me hear it. Hashtag HeyDan. All right, let's answer a question tonight. Jim Perez wrote in and asked, is anyone going to be accountable for all the looting and property damage in downtown? Kind of a topical question right now, considering what we witnessed last night on MLK. Police say a group of demonstrators, I guess that's a polite phrase or term to call them, set fire to a police precinct about 2 o'clock this morning and looted and burned businesses, some owned by people of color. It's also topical because we learned this week roughly how much downtown business has been losing in money to this damage, and it's a big number. The Portland Business Alliance conducted a survey, and they think businesses lost more than $23 million. About $4 million of that is from actual damages from rioting, looting, and skirmishes with police, that kind of stuff. The rest was in the form of lost revenue. As for holding individuals accountable for the damage that they're responsible for, I talked to the incoming Multnomah County District Attorney, Mike Schmidt. He said basically prosecuting protesters is a lot easier said than done.
It's very hard to convince a jury that when somebody is exercising their constitutional rights to free speech, that that's a good use of our resources to prosecute them criminally and then try to, impose some sort of a punishment on them. Quite frankly, I think for most people, your typical protester, a lot of them are, they're there, they're nonviolent, obvious. They don't have a history of getting arrested or a record like that. Getting arrested is a traumatic thing. I think we could consider whether or not that might be punishment enough for not listening to a police officer in the moment, and question whether or not it really is worth our community's resources to have them get appointed a public defender, go through a trial process, just to ultimately have a Multnomah County jury end up acquitting them.
Now, as we talk about riots and protests and property damage, I think it's important to keep them in context with America's long and complicated history of similar events. And the KGW Vault is a great tool to help us do that. Earlier this week, we looked back to 1992, the LA riots, the police beating of Rodney King that ignited them. It was an image that was burned into America's memory that year. But it wasn't the only image. Keep in mind, as we show you this, the language of the time as you're watching.
Of all the images, this one took your breath away. A crazy mob nearly beating to death a man whose only mistake was to be on a street called Florence in south central LA.
I really couldn't even stand to watch it. It was just sickening.
I was really shocked and disappointed that would happen anywhere.
The man's name is Reginald Denny, a 36-year-old truck driver and a father. He is alive but badly hurt. It's a very, very ugly situation here. A white man beaten by blacks, but also rescued by the kindness of other blacks.
He had everything.
Bobby Green was one of the 4 strangers who saved Denny's life.
Oh, he was trying to drive his truck, but he seemed like he didn't know what he was doing. So I just told him to move over, let me go ahead and finish driving for him. And he said, "Thank you, I really appreciate this."
Green asked that we not show his face because he is afraid of how his acquaintances will react to his courage. Pierre Yule also risked his life to help Denny.
I thought it was a reaction. This is not right. Let's get out here and do something.
Denny is in critical but stable condition in an LA hospital. He is moving his fingers and toes, a good sign after the brain damage he sustained in the beating. Denny's mother is Sandra Mundy.
I couldn't believe that anybody would do something to an innocent bystander like this. Why?
Another driver who was dragged out of his truck and beaten was less fortunate. He has died. Almost every big news story has a snapshot which etches its way into our conscience. From Los Angeles, possibly 2 snapshots, the beating of Rodney King and the beating of Reginald Denny. But despite all of the bad, some good.
I did a good deed. Yes, I do again.
It's not easy to watch. It really isn't. It can be disheartening to look back at these moments in history, but it is important, I think, to remember that we almost always come through on the other side better for it. I'm hopeful that it can happen this time as well. We're going to finish the story next. So what should we call the Ducks-Beavers matchup? Kathy writing in, what about the War for the Pond? You know, the duck pond, beaver pond, I like it. Somebody saying, what about the OG Bowl? You know, Oregon game, something like that. Not bad. Somebody wrote in and said, what about, this is Samwise, said, what about the Nike Bowl? Yeah, I think, does Nike sponsor both of those squads? And then Bunny wrote in, how about the Toilet Bowl? Bunny, come on. Hey, thanks for being with us this week. Appreciate it. We'll see you back here on Monday. Have yourself a great weekend. That's the story.